So, justice, this term, it involves balance. The concept of justice is talking about a version of karma. Again, receiving a fair and equal punishment or reward for your behavior. Now, when we think of justice, again, the image that usually comes up is Lady Liberty, and she has a blindfold over her eyes, and she's holding a weight balance of some kind, right? And sometimes a knife, but generally she's holding a weight balance, and it's supposed to show that this balance of weights symbolizes justice. You have to look at all the factors and see what is a fair punishment in the court system. This type of symbol is seen in many courts around the world because that is one concept of justice and that is one of the best ways to show it. Also, with Lady Liberty, I think the term is Lady Liberty, but it's just a woman, and she has a blindfold as well. And this blindfold is supposed to say justice is supposed to be blind. It's not supposed to matter what the person looks like. It just has to be fair based off how we balance the weights. Now, why I want to talk about justice is because in the last couple of days, a lot of cases have come up in the United States about the unfair treatment of black people. Now, this is a very sensitive topic. Again, I want to make sure that I handle this sensitive topic properly. If I do not, and if I say anything outlandish or out of character or whatever it is that is insensitive or wrong, please let me know. For me, I'm just going to speak off my mind. I did prepare a few writing points, but I just want to make sure I do everything right. Just let me know. I will fix myself if I make mistakes. Okay? But I do want to talk about these type of topics right now. Specifically, 3 scenarios that happened recently. One happened to a man named Ahmaud Arbery. Something happened to a woman named Amy Cooper. And a man named George Floyd was killed by the police. These 3 cases I'm going to talk about today. And I'm going to get into them. First thing is this, Ahmaud Arbery. Now, on February 23rd, Ahmaud Arbery was seen walking into a developing house. It was a constructed house, or it was a house in construction. He was seen by a neighbor who called police. He started jogging away. Now, 2 individuals and their friend took it upon themselves to chase after Ahmaud Arbery. They blocked him off from running away, confronted him, and led into a dispute which led to Ahmaud Arbery being shot 3 times and led to his death. Now, this whole incident, again, should have been treated by the police better. But after Ahmaud Arbery was dead, they took, again, their statements from these 3 gentlemen, 3 white gentlemen, and didn't follow up. That's it. No charges, nothing. It took a lot of complaining, a lot of protesting for those 3 men to be charged. Now, one of the reasons I'm thinking that this happened is because first, one of the men was an ex-police officer. So that man probably had some pull in the police department and with the district attorney and whatever it is. Another reason is, I would say, institutionalized racism. Again, I'm going to talk more about that. Okay? Again, many people might have thought it was a just cause for Ahmaud Arbery being killed. Again, I don't want to pick on a color or race, but I'm going to mention white people because this is the biggest race relations issue that is occurring currently in the United States of America. And so, I'm going to talk about this institutionalized racism between white people and black people in the US of A. This case, Ahmaud Arbery, again happened a few months ago. Still being talked today. The court case is still going on. Again, no idea what kind of charges these three men will get. But based off previous history, it doesn't look like they're going to serve real justice. And I mean that saying that their crime, their actions led to a person dying. Their punishment, if it was based on justice, should be fair and equitable to their behavior, leading to a man's death. I don't think that punishment will be. Again, one of the excuses, one of the defenses these men could say is that they were in pursuit of a criminal. Ahmaud Arbery was seen at the constructed house. In many ways, he was trespassing. But did that require him to be killed that day? Did that require three men to chase him, block him off, and trap him? And because he was trapped, he tried to fight back, and these three men would argue that they had the stand your ground defense, where they are allowed to use lethal force if they thought their life was in danger. But these three men were the only ones with weapons. They're the ones who blocked off Ahmaud Arbery's flight response from leaving the situation. And again, when you have adrenaline, you're looking for two responses: fight or flight. If he couldn't go through flight, he had to fight. How can he be blamed for something like that if they put him in such a position, with them having guns, cars, and blocking his way? This reminds me of another case with Trayvon Martin. Again, George Zimmerman, the man who killed Trayvon Martin, had a gun, feared for his safety, and shot him. He was not charged with anything significant. In many ways, he got away with murder. Many would say that. He used the same defense, stand your ground law. He thought his life was in danger, and he used lethal force to protect himself. Now, for these two cases, it makes me think, why would these gentlemen go to such a large extent to punish this black man that they might think is a criminal? Again, for sure, none of those men were 100% guaranteed that the black man in front of them did a crime. None of them. They might have thought, they might have assumed, but none of them were 100% guaranteed. And so they acted in such a way that led to a man's death, even without 100% guarantee. To me, that is such a failing of justice, that these people can act that way without any guarantee for their wrongdoing and get away without getting any severe penalties. Again, the three men in Ahmaud Arbery's case is not determined yet, but I'm thinking they will get away with nothing much, a slap on the wrist. Now, why that's important is because there has to be faith in the justice system. But for me, because of these cases, I find there's specific weaknesses. One thing is gun ownership in the United States of America. I think gun ownership laws in America help create institutionalized racism. It helps support it. And how I see that is, there's a difference how America views different races with guns in the country. If they see a white man with a gun, they're seen as patriots, as nationalists, as someone that supports their country. This is shown by the previous protests to the corona, boundaries and specific protocols. Many men had rifles slinging over their shoulders, yelling at police officers, and no one got injured by any police officers there. However, if you put guns in other people's hands, such as different races, people of color, I don't think they'd be treated the same. They would not be able to yell at any police officer and get away safely. They would not be able to appear the same way as a nationalist, as a patriot, because of their skin color and if they have a weapon. This was, again, how police treated some people with guns, specifically white people, and how we assume, again, there's not enough data because a lot of that data is being hidden about how police officers treat people of color with weapons. But for me, one easy way to remove these situations is to remove gun ownership for civilians, even police officers. In this case, there'd be less police brutality that leads to death if there were less guns. Now, let's look at this here. Let's look at the Ahmaud Arbery case and Trayvon Martin case. Ahmaud Arbery and Trayvon Martin died from the hands of people wielding guns. Even if you agree that they had just cause, they had a fear for their life, they had the weapon and they used it. Again, we can always get into the nitty-gritties of whether they were racist or not. I believe they were, and many people will say the same thing. But that part's hard to argue. The real argument that's easy to make right now is the way the person died was through a gun. And I think that's the first factor to make things more fair and, again, to serve justice. Because then there wouldn't be this imbalance of power with some people having guns and they're allowed to have guns, and some people who may or may not have guns but are treated much differently. Now, that's one part I want to say, but let's get into another case here. Let's talk about Amy Cooper, a woman that was in Central Park a few days ago, and she was walking her dog. Now, she was in an area where you are allowed to look at birds, which is called birding. And in this area, you cannot let your dog walk without a leash. What did Amy Cooper do? She let her dog walk around without a leash. There was a black man there during this time. This was around 7 a.m. And during this time, this black man was birding. He was looking at birds. He is part of a bird club. Now, this man got upset that this woman, Amy Cooper, is walking her dog without a leash in an area that specified that you have to walk your dog with leashes. The dog was interfering with his birding. He said that he told Amy Cooper if she could please put the dog on a leash. She said no. She said, okay, or he said, okay, if you don't listen to me, I'm not going to listen to you. Let's see what happens. Now, that statement, again, depending on where you hear from, might either sound comical, funny from a friend, or it might seem threatening if you don't know who's saying it. Amy Cooper said she felt threatened by those words. But the next action this black man did was he took out treats from his pocket and laid them out for the dog to eat. This black man said that he did this because he's dealt with dogs off a leash before. And he said the fastest way for an owner to put a dog on a leash is to feed that dog because they feel uncomfortable when a stranger is petting your dog. I have a dog and I feel the same way. I'd feel uncomfortable, and usually there's a specific saying where you have to ask the owner if you can pet their dog first. Okay? Now, she did feel uncomfortable. She starts raising her voice. This part is on video because the black man knew that he had to record this because in the United States of America, it's not surprising to know that there is racism. That if you do not have visual evidence, many times there are behaviors that work against you, specifically if you are a person of color. So this black man starts recording the aggression seen from Amy Cooper. And this is a viral video now. And she is yelling and she's saying that, oh, please stop recording. He says no. And she gets upset. She says, you know what? I'm going to call the police and tell them a black man is threatening me. She says it like that. She's saying it like a threat. to who she thought was threatening him to stop recording. He says he's going to continue recording. You can call the police. He says this because he knows he has visual evidence now of how she's acting. She calls the police and goes over how there's a black man threatening her and her dog. She says that part calmly, but in around 15 seconds or so, she starts screaming, starts yelling, saying similarly the same statement. There's a black man here still threatening me in Central Park. That part was an act, I believe. You can't switch your voice like that. And also talk calmly to the black man and try to threaten him to stop recording. Because the black man did not follow, she escalated and tried to use her position of power to get this black man in trouble. What's funny is it worked against her. What happened with her? Well, this video became viral. This black man was able to prove that he was a birder, that he meant no harm. And it really made this woman, Amy Cooper, look very foolish. She had to return her dog to a human rights shelter, or animal shelter, I believe. She got fired from her job. And right now, she's probably being pestered by media. All this, she basically ruined her future just because she tried to show a certain level of dominance over a race, just because this black man did not listen to her, even though she was in the wrong. It really upsets me when I saw that, and when I'm hearing more stories like this. Because remember, what we see is what becomes viral, is what becomes sensational through the media. But that doesn't mean those are the only stories of racism. I was going to say police brutality, but the next story is police brutality. George Floyd was a black man recently who appeared to try to use a fake check, a fraudulent check. That's what he was being detained for at a grocery store, a store of some kind. The clerk called the police. The police go to arrest George Floyd. Now, George Floyd is in handcuffs. Okay, he's in handcuffs. Again, there's some time that's sped up. You don't know, this part is not on film. But then you see on the viral film that's out there, George Floyd on the ground, stomach down, back up, head into the ground with one police officer with their knee lodged between the back of their head and partly their neck. You will hear in the video that George Floyd says he has trouble bleeding, or trouble breathing. He says everything is hurting. He says a lot of other gruesome things about his condition at that time. The police officer was not listening and had no shred of compassion. Now again, I do not blame the police officer for that. It is hard to work that kind of job. Again, compassion is very hard to show when you have to enforce the law. But in the video, it appears the man is pleading for his life. It's not yelling. It's not exactly begging, but it's almost begging. It is, again, asking for the police officer to stop. He's in pain. Now, this police officer, the two of them that are caught on film, they have a string of other issues throughout their whole career as a police officer. Many of them involve police brutality. And this incident is to add to it. After and finally, when, I guess, other cops show up and when medics show up, they report that George Floyd died. And this was direct cause of the police officer detaining George Floyd by putting his knee onto his head and neck. There's no other way about it, okay? They're still investigating. George Floyd might have had some sort of health condition. But again, what exacerbated the issue, what was the catalyst of the issue of his death, was this cop putting his knee and detaining George Floyd in a very aggressive, violent manner. Now, his argument for his protection was saying that George Floyd was resisting arrest. There is no proof of that. Again, he's saying that George Floyd resisted arrest after being handcuffed. How much can you resist after you've been handcuffed? You can still resist. But again, you have to measure your response. If you resist a little, you show a bit more aggression. But it appeared this cop showed too much. Maybe try to prove that he was in a position of power, a position of authority, and maybe went too far. But it led to a man's death. Now, those are some cases that happened relatively recently. And all the victims were black people. And in this case here, all the stories I mentioned were black men, if that matters. There's a recent story of a woman named Regis in Toronto, actually, near High Park, where she was in an apartment. The police were called. She was on the balcony. And what happened was she jumped, or what her brother and mom are suggesting was she was pushed off by police officers. Again, I don't want to say they did or did not because, again, there's no evidence so far. They are asking for more evidence for this case, and I hope we see it. But why I bring this case up is because there has been a lot of confidence lost in the police force. Canadian, American, whatever it is, and how they treat people of color. One of the most famous ads I saw recently, or specific slogans someone put on a sign was, "Where do we turn to when the people with a badge are the ones that are violent?" Remember, we use the cops for protection. But who protects us from the cops? Think about that. If you are not a person of color listening to this, try to think to what kind of privilege you are living with. Think about where you feel safe. If you feel safe 100% of the time, for sure that's privilege. You should talk to some other people and see their opinions on when they feel safe. And you might hear that people of color feel more unsafe in a variety of situations that you may never have heard of. Even for me, again, I am a person of color, but I am not a black man. So I cannot talk about the same types of factors that they may deal with. I try to understand, but I am coming from a different position. So I just want you to understand that because I don't want to speak out of line. Now, why I bring up these issues is I want to get into how we can solve these issues, okay? I want to get into how we can move forward. I proposed, again, removing guns from civilian ownership. I think that's one solution. Another solution is more representation of people of color, specifically black people, in positions of power in the United States of America, such as more black police officers, more black MPs, members of parliament, or in this case, politicians, and whatever it is, more black lawyers. Again, that will help. But I had a conversation with a friend recently, and again, that still might not help because if racism is institutionalized, even if you put people of different color in these institutions, if they follow the rules of the institution, they will still act racist. That part I want you to think about. Okay? Now, this brings up something that's important. This brings up how society should function. And I was thinking, how should society function? And I thought of a specific philosophical concept, which is called utilitarianism. And this means to create the greatest amount of happiness for the greatest number of people. It is a way to live life. It is a way to guide your actions to be more utilitarian for more people. Now, many philosophers would say a utopia, the best type of society, can be created by being more utilitarian, by serving the greatest number of people and creating the greatest number of happiness. Or, as some philosophers would redefine happiness as well being, because happiness is a very hard concept to really measure. Now, I thought about that and I tried to wonder what can I do to make society more utilitarian? And if I do that, will that actually be a solution? Well, maybe and maybe not. If we look at the utilitarian approach of these situations, in many ways, it can argue both sides. If we say here, no, the majority is white people in the United States of America. Let's create the greatest number of happiness or greatest measure of happiness for the greatest number of people, which might be white people. And the way that a utilitarianist might say that in an evil way would be that there should be more institutionalized racism. There should be more white privilege. So maybe utilitarianism is not the right approach there. Even though you can argue it that to create the greatest number of happiness for the greatest number of people, it would have to include people of color and their opinion and those factors. But it really depends on your scope here. Now, I'm going to bring up one specific philosopher named John Rawls. And his position on the matter was, in a way, getting into the weakness of utilitarianism and a proposed solution. He talks about justice. Again, the main concept of what I want to talk today. And he talks about it in a paper called Justice is Fairness. He gets into two principles of what makes something justice. One principle is called the justice principle, talking about, again, karma. One version of karma, whatever you do, you get an equal and fair punishment or reward. And one is called the equitable principle, that no discrimination should befall any person of diversity. He said those two things are necessary for a well-functioning society, a fair and just society. Now, he said, how can we test whether a society is fair and just? And he proposed a very simple thought experiment that we all can do here. So if you're listening here, try to think about this. It is called the veil of ignorance. Now, in this thought experiment, what you're supposed to do is imagine you are a baby without parents. Again, as a baby, you are a clean slate. Okay? Again, you don't know what race you are. You don't know what your socioeconomic background is. You don't know a lot of things about yourself. Imagine you are a baby. You don't know anything about yourself. In the veil of ignorance, John Rawls would say in this thought experiment, imagine that you are this baby and you're going to be put in some sort of foster family. Okay? And he'd say there is a lottery. There is a chance. There's some sort of luck involved on what foster family you would be put into. Again, you don't know the exact odds, but it all depends on what location you are going to be put in for your foster family. John Rawls would state that if you use the veil of ignorance in the United States of America, you would be very reluctant to participate in this thought experiment because there is such wide margins between different types of lives you can live, depending on which family accepts you as a foster family. If you're accepted into a rich white family, you might get the benefits of this draw. But if you are put into a black family in a bad neighborhood with bad other factors, let's imagine, then you might not like this draw of yours, how luck befalled you now. And so he says here, if you see wide margins between different types of people in a country, in an area, you wouldn't want to play this game. You wouldn't want to play this thought experiment because then you have a chance of getting dealt a bad hand, so to speak. But if you live in a more equitable society, in a more equitable location where there's a level playing field between different types of people, it doesn't matter if you play this thought experiment because, again, whether luck gives you the chance or not, you will still get into a family you feel is fair and equitable with other families in that area. When I did the Veil of Ignorance, I found that in Canada, there are some issues, but I wouldn't mind to be born in any family here in Canada. But I would not want to play this thought experiment in the United States because there is wider margins between the livelihood and the state of life many people live there. Some people are living very, very poor qualities of life in the United States of America. And again, that's highly represented by people of color. And there's some people living the richest, unspeakable lives, the lives that you dream and fantasize about. And this is overrepresented by white people. Again, some people might want to take those odds, but those odds can be very alarming for how distant some people are living from each other in terms of state of livelihood and quality of life in the United States of America. And this is what John Rawls would say, that you will always try to make a society approach where all families can be seen as equal in terms of the veil of ignorance. And that's what I want to end with you guys here today. Try this thought experiment. Check your privilege. See what you can improve. Because everyone can improve. And that's what we have to look for. How can we improve society? We can start with ourselves. We can start with how we can balance our actions. We can start with justice. Thank you, and I hope to hear from you soon.